Good morning. So, this April, the first Sunday in April, our religious exploration program begins a new rotation, and this month we are looking at nature and the way nature and life flows around us. So, today our story that we would like to share with you, that we're going to be talking about and discussing and looking at from all kinds of angles, is called The Three Sunflowers. Have you all ever read this story before? No? A new one. Okay. So we'll read it today. The Three Sunflowers. Dawn awakes early one morning, washing the summer sky in fresh new shades of pink and orange and lavender. As the sun rose over the low hill behind the back fence, the garden came alive with a happy hum of bees and butterflies and the joyful trill of red robin, brown sparrow, and golden finches. Gloria, a tall and regal sunflower, had sprung up earlier in the season near the pepper tree, where the bird feeders hung from a cracked branch. It wasn't long ago that she was a black and white seed, nestled in one of the feeders destined to be food. The messy diners of the feeders were frequenting the garden all spring, and they had scattered some of the seeds onto the ground where they became planted in the soil. Now, Gloria stood taller than ever, welcoming Sunny and Solita, the newest arrivals in the garden. Gloria admired their fresh yellow petals, smooth as silk, surrounding their faces like halos. She delighted in the soft, fuzzy centers and each as distinct as a thumbprint. Solita was just a head above Sunny, who longed to catch up with her. The garden was peaceful for the first few hours of the day, when the little trio of sunflowers absorbed rich nutrients from the soil. Over at the honeysuckle bush, an iridescent green hummingbird flitted from flower to flower, sipping sweet nectar through its bill. And nearby, the visiting goldfinches and house finches chirped merrily as they pecked at the feeders. And suddenly, a Cooper's hawk, its eyes blazing like hot coals, shattered the tranquility of the garden. It shrieked as it swooped down on the feeders, scattering the smaller birds in all directions. "Oh no!" Solita cried out. "Stop, stop, go away!" Sunny shouted. And the little birds flew off, wings aflutter, while their tiny hearts pounded in their feathered chests. There are times in our life when there is nothing we can do to prevent the chaos that surrounds us, Gloria gently explained to the young sunflowers. Then how can we help? Solita demanded to know. We are sunflowers, golden and radiant, Gloria reminded them. Our job is to be loving and peaceful wherever we stand. The two young stalks shook beside her, frightened by the scene they had just witnessed. Find a still point within you, Gloria guided them. Breathe all the way down to your roots. Is it gone? Solita finally asked, as her shaken stalk grew still. It's gone for now, Gloria assured her, and now is the perfect moment. The garden was once again a peaceful place, and harmony sang on a gentle breeze. Gloria, Sunny spoke up, how do you know things? Well, I'm taller than you, young one, she replied. I can see the world from a higher perspective. Will I grow taller and get bigger and stronger? Sunny wanted to know. Yes, you will find strength, Gloria beamed. You'll reach new heights and gain new perspectives too. Gloria felt that the youngster's tender leaves brush against hers. Throughout the midday, the garden was happy and peaceful, and the three sunflowers beamed at all the beauty around them. Brr, Solita shivered, and a gust of wind ruffled her silky soft petals. The wind began to howl through the branches of the pepper tree, whipping and snapping the leaves and the berries. The thunderclouds rolled in, casting dark shadows over the garden, and most of the inhabitants took refuge in their hideouts. The 3 sunflowers remained where they were standing. The biggest cloud opened up with a roar, and rain poured down in giant buckets, and the sunflowers were tossed from side to side, each crashing into each other's faces and their stalks. "Gloria, what's happening?" "It's a late summer thunderstorm." Water quickly filling in the basin around them, mud was softening, and Gloria was beginning to tilt. "You're slipping," Solita cried. "You're going to fall over." "My roots are deep," Gloria assured her. "Feel your roots beneath you and reach down into the earth. Find the strength inside you, given to you by the sun." Sunny shook and shuddered, but she was determined to be brave. And then spidery veins of lightning shattered the sky, and thunder boomed its response. "The sky is cracking," Sunny shouted. "You're doing the right thing," Sunny, Gloria praised her. "Fold your leaves and hold your body like a prayer." We are loved and protected by the great sun who created us, even when we cannot see the light through the darkness. The young flowers held on by their roots, afraid they might collapse at any moment. If we fall to the ground, our seeds will tumble into the earth and will begin life again. Our cycle is endless. Gloria reassured them between claps of thunder, and this storm will eventually pass. Gloria reached for their slender stalks and pulled them close, and they huddled together like a big yellow umbrella swaying in the wind. The dark afternoon turned to night, the storm drummed on, veiling the heavenly sky, and the moon watched faithfully as over the sunflowers from behind her veil. Dawn came early the next morning. The garden was still soggy, and silence hung in the air. Beneath the pepper tree, life began to stir. The robin pecked at the ground. The brown sparrow sang a greeting to the sky. "That tickles," a little voice giggled. "There's a butterfly on my face," Sunny laughed. "Shh," Solita whispered. "We're giving thanks to the sun." And Gloria smiled. And the 3 sunflowers stood still, their faces turned upright, grateful for another day in the garden. So we'll go off to our class. If y'all would sing us out to This Little Light of Mine.
I loved last Sunday's service when we got to meet our new members and hear the stories of who they were and why they came here, because that's really the heart of my little story today. But they only got 30 seconds to tell their stories, and my first draft of this talk was 63 pages long. At first I was horrified, and then I realized how spectacular it is that I have been so blessed by this congregation and the people here that I could keep you here until just before dinner time. We'll be sending out for lunch soon. To begin with, I don't have a G-spot. I'm a godless heathen. When I was growing up, my family never attended church. I somehow had learned about the concept of God and the devil, heaven and hell, but I felt no connection to any of it at all. I just cannot find a G-spot, that spot in your mind or your soul or your heart where God lives or is accepted or even makes sense. For a while I thought I was an atheist because I hadn't been raised in a religion. I hadn't imprinted anything like a little duck. But my nephew Brian, who was raised the same way, is the most deeply religious person I've ever known. He's known God personally since he was a tiny little boy. And I know that many of you here have a God or a higher power or a mystery or something. But try as I will, and I have, I cannot find a God. And that takes care of the G-spot of this sermon. No more on the deity. Friends have asked me, if you don't believe in God, why do you go to church? Most people don't know that UUs accept godless heathens. So my answer to that question for many years was for community. Not deep spiritual growth, not answers for the meaning of questions of life, not to become a more enlightened person. Some of you have heard me tell about the morning I came to church, and just before service started, our darling Frieda Karr leaned over and whispered to me, "Do you realize how much you've changed since you came here? And it's all for the good." Well, if that doesn't get your attention first thing in the morning, I don't know what. But I've always found it hard to articulate just what I get from Live Oak. I know now that community is a huge part of it, but that's not all of it. And then after watching a Northern Exposure rerun, it came to me. For those of you who are not huge fans of the TV program, it's a town of quirky people living somewhere in Alaska, as if we took Live Oak and moved us to the Arctic. This episode is known as When Rick Ate the Satellite. It opens with the townspeople hearing on the radio that one of the outer space satellites had run its course and was going to crash into the Earth somewhere, not too far from their little town. Cut to a scene where Maggie, one of the townspeople, is having a fight with her boyfriend Rick. Rick storms off with his sleeping bag and tent, sets up camp out in the woods, and is sitting by the fire, grumbling about women, particularly Maggie. Then a loud whoosh, a flash of light, fade to black. The next scene is of some of the townspeople in the woods looking down into the crater caused by the satellite. Ed, the Indian savant of the town, says in his most deadpan way, "Yeah, kind of hard to tell where Rick stops and the satellite begins." The closing scene is of Rick's funeral. When his casket is borne down the aisle of the town hall, there are microwave dishes, antenna, and all manner of satellite material poking out of the casket. One by one, the sniggers turn to giggles, and soon the whole room erupts into gales of laughter, eventually even Maggie. And in subsequent episodes, this event is always referred to as When Rick Ate the Satellite. And I guess that's the answer to the question, how has Live Oak changed me? What do I get from this? Well, I ate Live Oak. It's hard to tell where I end and the Live Oak begins. Unlike Rick, I didn't change all at once. There have been a few satellite hits, but most change has been gradual shifts that I'm often unaware of. They're small, cumulative, and have no beginning or end. I call those my Leonard Cohen moments from his amazing song lyrics. Ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. I was going to include this in my sermon title, but there are only so many metaphors a sermon title can support. So this is a story of satellites and cracks, my spiritual journey at Live Oak. The first church I ever joined was a downtown society right after I moved here over 30 years ago. I'd hung out with some UUs down south, and I just mostly wanted to meet some cool people here in Santa Barbara. Did I think it would change me as a person? No, not really. I was lucky enough to be at the downtown society when Betts was doing her ministerial internship. She headed a very active, vibrant women's group, and that became my only real deep connection at that society. After attending the downtown church for a couple of years, a nice older couple came over to me and said, "Is this your first time here?" Now, nearly every Sunday, I had been at that church with my daughter, who has spiked purple hair, dressed in garbage bags held together with safety pins. Now, I can melt into a crowd pretty easily, but a purple-haired punk, really? That day, I realized that that place was way too big for me. Jonathan Young invited me to join this brand new group of UUs that was meeting in Goleta on Friday nights, but I was hiking with the Sierra Club on Friday nights, so I passed. When the services shifted to Sunday mornings at a little tiny farmhouse over on Hollister, I started attending those services. We were so tiny, we fit into a living room. But soon we moved to larger digs at the University Religious Center in Isla Vista. And just after Live Oak formed, Betts, who was finishing up her ministerial internship, was called as our minister. And Betts was the main reason I made a permanent move to Live Oak. Her ministry spoke to me in a way that made me want to know more. And it was at Live Oak that I learned the nuts and bolts of church life, the business part, I guess. Everything about church life was new to me, as it was to many of the other newcomers, and I will always think of Gail and Tom Bomey as the godparents of Live Oak. They knew how a church ran, and they mentored us, those of us who were so totally clueless, and there was such great comfort in their self-assurance, kindness, and generosity. For some time, members kept asking me, when are you going to join Live Oak? And I said, I already had. See, I was so naive about anything churchy. I thought, once you signed the book, like the new members did last week, once you signed the UU book, you were a Unitarian Universalist, kind of like being christened a Catholic, being baptized a Mormon. You did it once and you were that forever. I didn't realize that you had to re-sign every church you joined. So somewhat belatedly, I signed the book and became a real Live Oak member. When we were so few people out at the URC, everybody had to help do everything. We all arrived early for services and put out the chairs, put down the little rug for the kids, set up a little dais, dragged some hymnals out of a box. We cheerfully accepted that we had to do all that. We all served on several committees. We met in each other's homes, which was really a cozy way to get to know each other intimately. I know now that this fledgling little group could have failed or stayed real tiny. Many other little groups do. But I don't think that ever occurred to any of us. And I realize now how good Betts was at teaching and encouraging leadership skills among the congregation, enabling us to take responsibility for our congregation. To paraphrase Lao Tzu when he was teaching about Wu Wei, the leader, when her work is done, her flock will say, "Amazing, we did it, all by ourselves." This was a lesson that really helped me a lot in my job life too. And we grew, and it came time that we needed a new and larger home. We had so many meetings about this, but knowing that we were going to need funding from the UUA, they sent one of their experts out to analyze what was going on with us, to evaluate our plans and our means. At the end of the evaluation, we all met one Saturday, and the nice lady told us her verdict. She nicely told us that we were not ready to take on such a large commitment and advised us how to proceed until we were. We were crestfallen and disappointed. What were we going to do? Then Joe Hutchins stood up and really took her to task. Who was she to tell us what we could do? And there were murmurs of affirmation throughout the room, and without ever taking a vote, I know that every one of us decided that day, yes, we were going to go ahead and buy this property. We didn't exactly come after her with pitchforks and torches and run her out of town, but I think she was really glad to leave. And we went ahead again, never doubting that we would succeed. Thankfully, Betts' partner, Peter Haslam, did much of the behind-the-scenes fundraising all over the country. But our buying this property and going ahead was really a sign of an empowered congregation. One of the reasons that we needed a larger place, of course, because we were having more and more children come. And the joy of watching these kids grow enriches all of our lives so many ways. I still remember The morning when one little boy came in, he was about 4, and his family went over and sat down, and he just kept walking and went over and climbed on the lap of one of the older kids and stayed there during that part of the service. It brought such joy to my life, and you can tell it did because I still remember it. But learning about committees was one thing, learning how to build this campus was another. Dear Ken Kruger, our architect, was so patient with us. I was on the building committee, and oh, what a process that was. But I came away with this. For all of the difficulty and spats that we had, I knew the heart intentions of the other building committee members, and I would have trusted my life with any of them, just not where to put the refrigerator in that kitchen. What was important was not that we all agreed, not that my ideas were better than someone else's, but that we get the job done. At the time, did I think that I was doing the work of the church and that it was a spiritual practice? No, not at all. Was it? Absolutely it was. Doing the work of this congregation, from the early days of putting out chairs until today, helping do the services, that work is a gift I give, not that I give, but that I receive. It's a gift that I receive. It's not work that I do. The sense of accomplishment, pride, and joy, being part of this community has enriched my life so much, and I've received so much back from my tiny little contributions. When Betsy talked about spirituality, I always said, I don't have a spiritual bone in my body. And Bets would smile her enigmatic smile and say, of course you do. Even then, I didn't confuse spirituality with religion. Perhaps I was lumping it with the 60s and 70s self-help movement, Timothy Leary, past life regression, psychocybernetics, EST, which had all gotten to be just a little too much. I didn't really know what spirituality was. When I was still at the downtown church, we had a weekend women's retreat, and the focus was choice and change. I'd never been to a retreat. I was always too busy. I had too many kids at home. But I came home full of wonder and awe at the power of those women and what they had to say. And after that retreat, I realized that when you take control of your life, when you take control of your actions, you don't get to be a victim anymore. It was a huge, huge shift in me. One of those little cracks. So without knowing it, I think my spiritual path had begun. And these little Leonard Cohen cracks continued. At one women's group, we talked about the sacred in the ordinary. And one of the women described how every morning she would go out on her porch to eat her cereal with her special spoon. No one else was ever allowed to use her special spoon. And when she spoke, you saw beatitude, you saw spirituality, you saw sacred. Another little crack and more light. And I saw how the smallest ritual in our lives can become sacred. So by that time I was thinking, well, maybe we're onto a little something here with the spirituality. It's kind of fun. At another women's meeting at my home, we were discussing about women making altars, and I had said, I've never made an altar. And a couple of the women chuckled and pointed out that I had them all over my house. Later, I took a little inventory, and they were right, I did. I live in what my girls call controlled clutter. But there were many little gatherings of meaningful objects all around my house, and maybe it just took somebody pointing out what they were for me to realize how spiritual they were. And I'll bet every one of us here has a special little shelf or somewhere where you keep those rocks and shells and little objects you pick up, these things that are imbued with memory and meaning. Here at Live Oak, we have a practice of refitting, remodeling, and redoing holidays to fit our personal beliefs. And it has been so liberating to stop doing all that crazy Christmas stuff and instead celebrating the solstice. If you don't believe in God or that Jesus was his son, then why the hell would you climb on the roof and string lights and kill a perfectly good tree and buy people presents that they don't really want? Winter is a time of hibernation for animals, and so now I find the traditional holiday time a time of rest and contemplation. I also wait until the spring equinox or my birthday to make my New Year's resolution. And I was reminded of why waiting is a good thing when I was watching the National Geographic Channel, and there was an old mama bear climbing out of hibernation. She was really cranky, and I thought, who'd want to make a New Year's resolution feeling like that? So I wait until I come out of my hibernation a little bit and focus on the spring and the growth and the newness. Now, I know we don't use the hymnal as much as we did before we had the magic screens, and I love the magic screens. But I love that book. It's a font of wisdom, inspiration, and affirmation. I like singing to the screens because I think we sing better when we look up and sing at the screens. But I love the intimacy of holding the hymnals for our reading. In preparing for this talk, I referred to it often. I was reminded of how many times I've come to services like we all do, with a head full of life, some little bits floating near the surface. And sometimes the hymn chosen for that day sends a little lifeline to those floating bits, pulls it in, puts it to rest. One Sunday I came with a heavy heart, having just learned that my brother's partner, Peter's father, had died. He was a beloved man. They were a very, very close family. And I was struggling with words to share with Peter about his father and what his father represented, this lovely, wonderful man that Peter loved so much. And that Sunday we sang the song, Just As Long As I Have Breath. And the words I was seeking to reflect what I thought of Peter's father and Peter's father's life were these. If they ask what I did best, tell them I said yes to love. It took a lot for this strong Mexican Catholic man to accept that he had a gay son and accept my brother into their close family, but they did. And this happens to me all the time, in song, in readings, and certainly in sermons. But by far the greatest gift I have ever been given by growing into a UU is forgiving myself and forgiving others, acceptance of my own imperfection and others' imperfections. I don't know if ministers in other religions will include in their sermons their own inadequacies and shortcomings, and sometimes minor marital discord. I was so shocked when I first heard that from our ministers. I know I'm not perfect, but do I want the whole congregation to know it? I grew up trying to hide imperfection, and I could rationalize or justify just about anything that I did. This reading from our hymnal is a mantra, which I repeat to myself now and again, the words of Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. When we truthfully look at our imperfections and name them and own them, it really takes the power from them, and change and healing begins. The most powerful example of acceptance and forgiveness in my life was being able to allow my father back into my life. Even as a small child, I avoided him. But as he aged, he tried to heal his relationship with his children, and I rebuffed all attempts. In a story way too long for today, I was able, finally, to get to know my father, to let go of the past, and in the last 10 years of his life, we had some great happy times together. It was one of the greatest gifts I gave myself, forgiveness and acceptance. And again, the words of Mary Oliver. And when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. I had to ask his forgiveness too. My brother's life was a troubled one. His substance abuse made everyone's life he touched a nightmare. My father never gave up hope on him. And when he would speak of my brother, my angry response was that the worthless guy just wasn't worth all of that concern. When my own children started stumbling through life and having problems, I realized you never stop loving your children. You never give up on them. And I had to humbly ask my Father's forgiveness for my insensitivity to his grief. It was an amazing grace moment. I was blind, but now I see. It wasn't until Reverend Erica did a service on losing hope that I realized that was the life my brother led, a life without hope. And since then, my anger towards him has turned to a deep sadness. The power in the words, "And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find." If only we could have brought it to him, if only he could have found it. Being able to heal these wounds was not the result of just one specific sermon, one song, or one reading. It was a series of cracks that happened, often without my knowing. It's the magic that happens when we're not looking. And there was no place I think I could have found it than here, than right here with all of you. There have been a number of times, though, when, like Rick, I ate the satellite. I don't know if they're spiritual moments, but they were huge shifts in me. One type of service that I didn't think that I really needed to learn anything from was the ones about tolerance of the other, those who are different, sexual orientation, racially different, religiously different. I grew up with a gay brother, no big deal. My husbands look like a delegation of the United Nations. My first husband was Spanish, the second half Mexican, the next was Jewish. It's not so bad. My grandmother had 6, I only had 3. One of my stepsons is black, the other Indian, and my mom had been a Mormon, so I had it all covered. So I was so stunned when a satellite hit me blindside one Sunday morning. The night before, I had been to see the movie Paradise Road, about the forced march of European women on Sumatra by the Japanese in World War II. And I wasn't prepared for how violent and gut-wrenching and disturbing that movie was. Came to church the next day, and I sat down and was reading the order of service. It was in the building over there, and we kind of sat in a horseshoe. I glanced up, and sitting across the room in the front row was a young family, and the father was Japanese. And before I could take another breath, a wave of white-hot hatred, anger, and violence washed over me. It was so blinding and so shocking and took me so unaware, I was just sickened. That something as small as seeing a disturbing movie could have brought out something in me that I did not know was there. I couldn't believe that I could be so capable of feeling such unwarranted and unjustified hatred towards someone. I sat stunned through that service. I don't think I heard any of it. The feelings of that Sunday haunted me for days. It was awful realizing that I wasn't colorblind and accepting, and I saw how easily hatred can happen and how it can live in all of us. So now I listen a little more carefully to those sermons. The latest satellite has been a happy one, Reverend Thomas's music. Who could not love this kind, gentle, strong man? But I have to admit, when he was first here, I found the music just a little bit strong. I go, oh dear. And then came last Valentine's Day, and if you weren't here, it was a rollicking song fest of love songs. And again, I was going, oh dear. A few minutes into the service, something shifted in me, and I got it. You could feel the love and joy right in your gut. The connection of song and soul and spirituality is not a new concept by any means, but Reverend Thomas has shown us how to do it. It was one of my very favorite Sundays, Thomas's gift, and another satellite. And have you all noticed how better our singing has become in the last couple of years? And I really, really hope we keep it up. I can't look back at any time and say that my spiritual path began at this point or at this point. There was no great awakening. It was more like a slow dawning. And this path has not been without stumbles and pitfalls, dark moments, confusion, times when I felt nothing spiritual at all, when I felt like a big fraud even talking about the sacred. But through all that, I have never lost hope. When those bumpy times come, I've learned to pause in silence and repeat the words of Edward Teller. When you get to the end of all the light you know, and it's time to step into the darkness of the unknown, faith is knowing that one of two things shall happen. Either you'll be given something solid to stand on, or you will be taught how to fly. Now, when I feel that spiritual path firmly under my feet, I hum to myself, how precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. I hum it often. I hope you do too.